Welcome back to Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. I'm Alex, host of the show, and I'm thrilled to have you joining us today. Often I spend time on the show discussing the intersection of fine art and try to relate or present other modalities and forms of art onto an equal footing, whether it's film or fashion or one of my favorite topics, storytelling. We've actually spent a lot of time on the show discussing the importance of storytelling and its use in, as I always like to say, the democratization of art. Storytelling isn't just the movies we watch, it's woven into everything from the ads on TV to, wall labels hanging in a gallery. It's all storytelling. Now, we've talked before about the range of mediums and shapes that storytelling can take. We've had Liz Samuel of Montclair Story Salon to talk about oral storytelling. We've had Vogue writer Christian Allaire to discuss not just the artistry of fashion, but the importance of personal storytelling and memoir writing. And we've had Georgette Gilmore of the Montclair Local to shine light on the storytelling surrounding journalism. This week, we are going to dive into literature, specifically narrative nonfiction, and the way that we can creatively present history. So for this episode on Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me, we are thrilled to welcome Vanity Fair journalist Joe Pompeo, who is the author of the novel Blood and Ink, a true crime story which details an infamous double murder that captivated the attention of Americans in the 1920s. But on Sunday, September 28th, Joe will be here at MAM moderating a conversation with narrative nonfiction writer Michelle Young, the author of the recently debuted novel The Art Spy, which carefully and dynamically tells the story of Rose Valland, a French curator and resistance informant who quietly, under the nose of Nazi occupation, spied on the German forces stationed in Paris who carried out the theft of art across Europe, enabling her to save thousands of looted artworks in the process. This conversation between Joe and Michelle is one in a series of 3 upcoming talks we're calling From Resistance to Revelation, Stories of Art and Intrigue in France. That series is in partnership with Watchung Booksellers and explores the power of art in times of war, loss, and transformation. Each conversation will reveal how artists, curators, and everyday people work to preserve culture and make meaning during moments of upheaval. Now, without any more delay, here is my conversation with Joe Pompeo. Hi, Joe.
How's it going?
Thanks for coming on Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. I really appreciate it. For an audience that's not super familiar with you, just introduce yourself.
So my name is Joe Pompeo. I live here in Montclair. I believe my family are still members of the Montclair Art Museum, where my older kid, my daughter, has attended the art camps here for the past 3 summers and really loves them. But professionally, I am a narrative nonfiction author and journalist. I've sort of transitioned, or I'm still kind of transitioning a little more away from my journalism life and into a life writing, concentrating more on books and longer form things like podcasts and such. But I have most of my career was in journalism. Most recently, I was a senior correspondent at Vanity Fair for a number of years. I worked at lots of places before that, and I still freelance and write for magazines and keep one foot in the door of that world too.
Amazing. Obviously, this show, the impetus of this show is opening the door for new people to experience museums and find an entryway into the arts and culture and historical organizations and whatnot. A lot of the work that you do, especially in your, literary work is deals in history, and upcoming at the museum is a series of book talks, of which one you will be moderating for this book called The Art Spy, which tells the story of Rose Valland, who saved priceless works of art from, Nazi occupation in France. To start, less so about, the book that you're going to be talking about with Michelle Young, but your book, Blood and Ink, what draws you to kind of undertold, underrepresented historical, events, these true crime kind of things, and telling it in a way that is, through the written word that's not necessarily it's journalism, but it's also storytelling. Well, yeah, it's narrative nonfiction.
It's the storytelling. Yeah. I think that draws me, you know, and over, you know, more than 20 years as a journalist, you know, starting from newspapers, but then kind of like gradually moving more into, magazine work and longer sorts of things. You know, it's all storytelling. Even the shortest story you can write or the longest story. Yeah. So I had a professional grounding in storytelling, and you know, just in terms of what I think interests me in historically, I'm kind of interested in dark history and old crimes and things like that. You know, I'm kind of like, I love, you know, period shows on TV, and I've always kind of loved the lore of, you know, old unsolved crimes, and, you know, Jack the Ripper and things like that. And I started reading, you know, I was never a big nonfiction reader. I was always more like, growing up, more of a fiction reader. And I was, I studied English literature in college. And then I really was immersed in the news world and current events professionally for a long time. But eventually, you know, maybe a couple of years before I started writing my first book, Blood and Ink, I started reading more books in that genre. You know, this is kind of like for lack of a better example, the Devil in the White City genre, you know, the big famous Eric Larson book. But all these sorts of like, you know, stories that kind of transport you to, you know, some time from long ago, and focus on, kind of braid two different narratives, like maybe an old crime, you know, braided with some narrative about something that was culturally significant or some other force or whatever. So I kind of decided I wanted to write a book like that. And I just basically went out looking for one. And, you know, to do these sorts of books and to make them read in a way that feels like cinematic, you know, like a reader feels like they're reading a novel, even though it's all true, you have to do, you know, a real significant amount of historical research and archival research and things like that. And I really enjoyed doing that for the first time. You know, so like, and I think the storytelling, it all flows from that research, because that material, you have to have so much to really like bring characters to life and to bring scenes to life and things like that. So really, to answer your question, I just think like my love of storytelling, my love of history, and, you know, kind of my newfound love of digging through documents and old files and things like that is really what, it's just a lot of fun. You know, I think anyone who does this work finds it really, really fun. You know, that's why I want to do more of it. And that's why I love talking with fellow practitioners like Michelle. So it'll be a great chat with her when we have that at the museum.
Absolutely. You know, when you're kind of talking, I you know, the thing I was kind of thinking about is like, you know, you're spending so much time in the stacks and libraries doing research, you know, working with, you know, firsthand accounts and, you know, talking to, you know, people who have a, you know, if not a memory, then like a connection to these things. But that also probably leads you to, you know, historical institutions and museums that they like to, you know, spend a lot of time and dig deep. Do you, I guess, as a researcher, as a journalist, as somebody who, you know, is passionate about telling these stories correctly, because in a lot of ways, we talked about this on a previous episode with Liz Samuel, who does the Montclair Story Salon in town, how, you know, storytelling is an art form, and there's an art to crafting these narratives. And in your case, a big element in that palette is making sure the history is right and accurately told, because it is, you know, it is fact more so than it is fictionalized, obviously. And the narrative shouldn't take away from the facts that are being presented in the work that you're doing. But I guess in your time researching, do you have a favorite museum memory, or even just growing up, like a favorite museum memory?
You know, I didn't do so much museum digging I mean, Michelle certainly, because she was dealing with art, and some, you know, some books even that are not about art might take you to, but I think like in terms of institutions, I think there's a certain archival and curatorial element at play, you know, whether it's an archivist who has very carefully gone through a set of documents that have been entrusted to them to be organized in such a way that it could be accessed by people like me. You know, it's not just like these things are just thrown in boxes. There's a kind of a curatorial element, which I think is very much true for museums as well, the work that's on display than the work that's, in storage somewhere. There's a lot of thought that goes into the presentation. And I think that's kind of like analogous.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of a favorite, I had some fun, like really fun research breakthroughs, but just in general, like, I spent a lot of my book research took place in the basement of a public library, the New Brunswick Public Library. And I also spent a lot of time at the main library at Rutgers, where I went to school. And just like, there's just something about being, I think this is more applies to Rutgers. It's an academic institution, right? There's more of a synergy there to what we're talking about, I suppose.
Totally, yeah.
But, just being in the quiet environment, having an archivist wheel out a cart with these kind of like precious documents from history and just sitting there for hours and hours amongst, all sorts of old books and manuscripts, all around you on shelves and things like that. There's just something, I don't want to say, relaxing. There's something very engaging about it. You just really kind of get lost, and the time just kind of goes by. So I'd imagine that's probably very similar to maybe the experience of, going through artwork and deciding what goes into an exhibit. So like that. So just those settings in general, I find very enjoyable.
No, absolutely. Like as you're kind of talking about like that, almost like the privilege of experience to get to be like that intimately connected with those documents or in those cases like artifacts or what have you. Like I think about like there's a indigenous artist that we have on view here at MAM, Sarah Sense, who I've become very familiar with. We've worked very closely together. I've done documentary work with her, but she spent a lot of time in like our archives, essentially like reviewing Chitamacha baskets and using that to inform the work that she's doing and the storytelling that she's doing through her work. So I definitely get it. But I guess kind of like rounding back around to the Art Spy and the book talk that's coming up. I read your Substack that you did on Michelle, and I thought it was really, really great and really informative. And I'm just curious, like, how did you stumble across her work? Are you colleagues, friends, just found the book and just in your research of narrative nonfiction and just kind of were enamored by it? Like what led you to finding the story?
So, so I should say I do kind of pay attention to like, kind of what's like books that are coming out in the kind of general, like, narrative history
I
genre.
That. Yeah.
But so and this was a big book with good promotion. So I think it would have been on my radar either way. But Michelle and I we're in an authors group together.
Nice. Yeah.
That meets every few months, and it's kind of like it's kind of heavily it's a nonfiction authors group. We meet in Manhattan, at some different bar every few months.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a large group, and it tilts kind of heavily more towards kind of like narrative history, historical nonfiction people. So I met Michelle through that, and we had, we had mutual author friends. She does a pretty, has a popular kind of salon series in Brooklyn that she hosts. But we, connected, through this group, and people talk about the books they have coming up, and it's nice because when someone has a book that's coming out, you kind of have a built-in group of people to show up to the launch event, because that's very important to get people out to your launch event. So so then I do this, thanks for mentioning my Substack. I do every month an interview with a kind of like narrative history author who has a new book out, or not necessarily, doesn't have to be new, but I'd like to talk to them about specifically an interview about like their research and what goes into doing these sorts of books. So Michelle, when her book came out, I was like, we should do an interview about this.
I find it deeply fascinating.
It's really fascinating. And just to, and for the Art Spy, this is a book that required Michelle to spend a lot of time in France at all sorts of different archives where the papers are not necessarily organized in the way they'd be at a university institution in America, and to tell like a rollicking, thrilling work of history about, a figure who's pretty under the radar, most people haven't heard of, and to bring that person to life, and in a story that took place in World War II Europe. It really it requires you to be there. She had to travel there and really spend time digging and digging and digging. So just to give readers an appreciation of what goes into doing books like this. That's kind of the idea of this interview series I did. So I don't think our talk at the museum, I expect will be a little broader than that, but I'm sure that attendees would love to hear about, some of the research she did for the book.
Absolutely. What do you think, because you kind of piqued my interest on this, but like, what do you think the benefit or, what do you think institutions get out of researchers like you or Michelle going to these places and combing through the stacks, like I said, and really like digging into, they have, all these documents and letters and, maps and files that, are there and were deemed important enough to hold on to, but maybe haven't been given the light of day to really be scoured for stories and scoured for relevance in that way. Like what does it provide the institutions, with given your research or her research?
I think it acknowledges the importance of the work they do in preserving these sorts of things. I find that librarians, archivists can be, I think that there could be some crotchety ones out there, but by and large, I find that they love to be helpful. It's their job to help you find these things, to surface these things, because they have a belief in the importance of preserving works, and to see the fruits of that labor that they do come to life in, like mainstream commercial books and find a large general audience.
Yeah.
I'd imagine that there's a recognition that comes with that, that what they do is important, and that they do this so it can be used in this way, so that people like me or Michelle eventually find this stuff. Preservation is one thing, but actually taking that information, translating it for a general audience, making it more widely available as part of a great story. That's a big part of the reason why. I mean, they exist for academics too, doing research and things like that. But I just find that they are very, very generous people with their time and their knowledge of how to put these collections together.
Yeah,
they want people like us in there, enjoying these things that they've taken such care to preserve.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess one of the things that I wonder is like, and I guess this is pivoting a little bit away from the actual time spent researching, but it does relate. I mean, how do you as an author and a storyteller, or Michelle in that case, obviously you can't tell the whole story. You can't give every little intricate detail that you're finding and you're uncovering, but how do you take these complicated subjects that are convoluted and often have mixed opinions depending on what it is, and make that subject accessible to like a wide audience, that in a palatable way and in a respectful way, in the case of yours dealing with like
right,
cold cases.
People have been murdered.
Exactly.
Well, I think that the key, and I think this is also maybe one of the things that differentiates, kind of narrative popular history from academic history, is that these books are really character driven.
Totally.
They have to be. And when you're at the stage of developing these before you even are writing a book or really researching it in earnest, you are trying to sell it to a publisher, which takes a lot of advanced work with your agent.
Yeah, the inside baseball of the mystic publishing industry.
And your agent is coming up with a proposal that can sell to a major publishing house. And a big thing they're going to be working with you on is who are the characters that a reader can fall in love with, who they can follow on a journey throughout, this 90,000 word book. So I think you have to find characters that can sustain a really significant arc, not too many of them, but kind of a core amount that there's enough material to really develop. And I think that is what everything else hangs off of. So the narrative arc, this character driven narrative arc is kind of what, you're kind of researching characters in a story, and not just like everything that happened with this murder, everything that happened with this, with the looting of Nazis looting artwork in World War II Europe. You have to really pin it on characters.
Totally.
So that kind of helps you focus, narrow your focus.
Yeah.
And make it, turn this voluminous amount of messy documents into something people are going to want to read. Absolutely.
I'm more curious because I'm a writer. I write fiction. I'm always curious when it comes to like, because I have immense respect for like narrative nonfiction writers, and I guess my curiosity as a fiction writer is, and I wonder if you get maybe pressure from publishers on this sometimes, but like, do you ever have to fight and I'm sure you probably don't, because you have integrity and you are a good storyteller but do you ever feel pressure to almost embellish these characters? Because again, you're dealing with people that you can't speak to. You can't get a sense of their personality when you talk to them. So when you're developing, or maybe I guess developing is the wrong word, but I guess reviving their personality on paper, I guess what's the push and pull for that kind of dance? Because it's delicate, People have different levels of comfort, I think, with what they're willing to embellish. I think that there was a history of narrative nonfiction, going back to the 60s and some classic works that probably today would not be considered nonfiction because a lot of stuff was made up. And I think the genre overall has definitely moved in a direction where, most of the authors that I know or am friendly with, everyone is very, very strict about not publishing anything that cannot be completely verified, or that dialogue that didn't actually come from a specific source. There's more pressure in the phase where you're doing a proposal and selling the book, because you have to make this palatable to a publisher who's going to give you money to do this for a few years. They might push you into a more of a realistic historical fiction, camp rather than the narrative nonfiction. So it's tempting, when you just want some little extra bit of detail about a scene or something a person's saying, and you can't have it. You got to work with what you have. But you could also, there's like, there's kind of little hedges and tricks you can employ to kind of write things in a way that might suggest what a character must have been thinking, for instance. But I think that's going back to what I was saying about finding characters. You have to know going in there's enough material, because the story, like I said, the storytelling really is driven by the material you have to work with. And when you have tons and tons of letters or old memoirs someone has written, or court transcripts, or things like that, generally there's more detail than you can include. Absolutely.
So when you have that stuff, you don't have to embellish too much because you have a lot to work with. But going into the book, you have to know that that's all there. Or else you're in trouble.
One of the things that I'm curious about, it's like we've seen, and whether it's through print or film, like things like the Da Vinci Code, which obviously is not a narrative nonfiction, that is a fiction piece, but it pulls millions of people into interest into the arts and museums. And I guess, like, do you think that the Art Spy and subsequent stories like that can do the same thing and can inspire people to dig a little deeper and think a little bit more broadly about the way that we talk about art, or display art, or contextualize the history around art, and things that have happened? I just saw the other day that they're still finding some of these looted pieces, like in Argentina to this day. And
I think a story like The Art Spy or other, there's kind of like and Michelle's book's not quite this, but there's a kind of true crime genre of like the art scandal, the art theft scandal, right? So that and Michelle's book, it kind of is that, but it's also, kind of World War II history. But I would think that because, again, these types of books, which are transportive and cinematic. You're reading them. The setting is going to be in museums. You're going to get a feel of what it's like to be there to do this sort of work. So, as a reader who just if you love a book like this that deals in art history or things like that, I think that a good way to actually feel that connection would be to walk into a museum. And so I think that, like, in a very literal way, just after reading a book like that, you might want to go check out a museum. But I think what you're getting at is the richness of archival, like, development that goes into these books that inspire you to want to kind of like seek out museum. I mean, I would hope so, I guess.
Yeah.
Is my answer, because these are important institutions that everyone should patronize. So I would hope so. I don't know if my book is about Blood and Ink is about this wild rich people murder from the 1920s and the rise of the tabloids. So will people be inspired to want to go digging through archives or visit a museum after reading my book? I don't know, but I think certainly books about art or kind of like these kind of like rollicking art theft stories. I could picture people wanting to go take a trip to the Met or something, or the Montclair Art Museum after reading one of those.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I appreciate you being on the show. This is great. When is the book talk? Where can people find you on social media? Where can people purchase Blood and Ink?
You can purchase Blood and Ink anywhere you would like here in Montclair at Watchung Booksellers. It's still on the shelves at Barnes & Noble, anywhere you order your books online. I am at Joe Pompeo on Instagram. I am joepompeo.substack.com if you'd like to subscribe to my newsletter and emailing list. This talk, I believe, is Sunday, September 28th. Here at the museum at 3 p.m. And I believe Michelle will be signing books afterwards. So we hope to see you all there.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate it, Joe. Thanks again for coming on the show. This has been great.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for sticking to the end of this episode. Again, this has been Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Like I said from the top, this is not the only book talk that's coming to MAM about this sort of thing. We actually have a talk coming up sooner on September 25th at 7 p.m. We're actually first going to be talking about Mona's Eyes with author Thomas Schlesser. That's going to be on September 25th at 7 p.m. Of course, there will be a book signing as well. Then on September 28th at 3 p.m., as was the crux of this whole show, The Art Spy with Michelle Young will be discussed, including a moderated conversation with Joe Pompeo. Again, thank you, Joe, for being on the show. Really appreciate it. And then lastly, on October 14th at 7 p.m., we will be having a conversation with author Christopher C. Gorm on his book, Matisse at War. We're really excited about all of these. It's super interesting. It's going to be great. Buy your tickets now. So you can experience all of these storytellers talk in person, or just get, a ticket for whichever one you're interested in. They're all really cool. I know that Mona's Eyes is getting a lot of critical acclaim right now, so it might be worth hearing the author speak in person. Alas, this has been Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. The Montclair Art Museum is open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We hope to see you again soon. Please rate, review, subscribe to this show wherever it is you stream podcasts, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We're around. We appreciate it. Thanks so much.